Hello everyone, Rurikhan here, bringing you guys another Dark Souls 2 discussion video. This video actually came out a little bit earlier than I was expecting. What I mean is I started working on another Dark Souls 2 video earlier than I expected. If you guys remember back in the 5th video that I did, which it's weird for me to speak in these terms because that particular video hasn't even been released yet. Today is the 17th. And I expect video number 5 to be released on the 18th. So it's, it's always kind of weird because I'm preparing content ahead and whatnot, but whatever. The point is, I wasn't expecting to make another Dark Souls 2 video so soon. And the reason for that was I thought I had some time before the actual magazine article had been revealed. But as we all know, eventually the magazine article was revealed on the 15th, which also made two of my videos obsolete in some of the points that they make, which was a bit of a pain in my ass if I'm to be completely honest, but I kind of put an annotation in there so that you guys know that all of those opinions were formed ahead of time of knowing about all the stuff that was written in the magazine article. Now, as you might have noticed, the background footage, for those of you that actually pay attention to the background footage in these videos, the character has changed. And let me just talk a little bit about that. The reason I changed the character is because the point of making that vanilla knight, if you so wish, the point of making it was showing people how easy the game was and all that stuff. But to be completely honest, what ended up happening is I got bored. I just got bored of that character. Like I got bored of playing that character. Like you can easily do the rest of the game with that character, but I got bored of it. I mean, one of the things about Dark Souls is constantly swapping out armor, fooling around with different gear, testing out different weapons. And I just got bored of using the broadsword and the knight's shield all the time. So, I mean, I just couldn't take it anymore. This is actually a different build that I'm working on. And so, whatever, just to kind of explain you guys what happened in that. And if I'm to be completely honest, I'm tired of trying to prove people just how easy Dark Souls really is. Easy to the point where you can actually finish the game in the gear you start with, which you totally can, which is something that I was going to do. It's just, I run out of patience for telling people that Dark Souls is not hard. It's just, my patience is just out the window. I want to do crazy stuff in Dark Souls. I want to risk things. I want to do things that some people might deem, oh, that was pretty hard. But it's like, I don't really think it was that hard. And it was a lot more fun than just doing it the safe way to begin with. So anyways, that's the reason behind it. The change in the character in the background, in case any of you actually was wondering about that. Something else is that I should probably warn you ahead of time that this is going to be a fairly lengthy discussion. I've gone through the article several times, and I still believe that some stuff I might be missing because, I mean, this is an article which was written in English, obviously, but it was translated from Japanese. So, I mean, I already have to translate English myself, so to speak, because as most of you know, I am Portuguese. And then to be translating English, which apparently was translated from Japanese. And I understand that, like, it's in plain English, but there's a lot of things in this article that you can't just take at the value of the words in the article, because you need to understand that it comes from a different language. So, in all honesty, I think that someone who perfectly understands Japanese might have a different opinion on this particular article than someone who only understands English. This is my opinion anyways, because I think there's a lot of stuff that's lost in translation that someone who further understands the Japanese language will do a better service of understanding exactly what was said in several parts of this article. And something else, before we finally get started, and I realize it's been a couple of minutes, I haven't even got started on my analysis yet, is I'd also like to warn you that, as most of you know, I do not prepare that much for my videos ahead of time. As a matter of fact, most of the discussion that happens in my videos, most of the stuff I say, is just stuff that happens in the heat of the moment as I am saying it. It's mostly improv. It's not like I sit here and it's like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to say. I usually don't. And so I believe that I should warn you guys that what I will say within the next minutes might completely change the way you feel or your expectations about Dark Souls 2. So just warning you ahead of time that your expectations on Dark Souls 2 might change. So if you want to keep on just straight up as excited as you were when you just heard Dark Souls 2 is coming out and you haven't heard anything else about it, and you don't want to hear anything else about it, I would advise you to go ahead and tune out. But anyways, it's just, I feel I should warn people is all. I don't even know exactly why I said that, but it's, God, man, I'm sorry. It's just, I haven't slept that much today, and as soon as I woke up, I started analyzing the article to get to work on it, and it just hasn't been easy. It's been quite a few long hours trying to figure out what I want to say about it. So I'm going to start talking about the stuff that comes in the interview about the same order where it shows up in the interview. So if you want to, you can grab the scans or whatever and start reading alongside me, and I'll tell you my opinion along several things. So starting up, one of the first things I wanted to point out is the graphics. According to the magazine, to the Edge magazine, and I quote, it is an athletic leap forward in terms of graphical fidelity. Dark Souls 2 looks effortlessly ready for the next generation of consoles, on par with the fidelity of Watch Dogs and Star Wars 1313. This is the opinion of the reporters that were in From Software's headquarters and actually watched a 10-minute demo of Dark Souls 2. According to them, Namco Bandai is going all in with its investment in Dark Souls 2, lumping unprecedented resources behind it. Now, this is obviously a good thing right here. I mean, regardless of whatever happens next, this is a really good thing. I mean, better graphics, who wouldn't want better graphics? Looks effortlessly ready for the next generation of consoles? Hell yeah. I mean, I wouldn't mind at all if Dark Souls 2 came in the next generation of consoles, because I mean, we've all seen that for this generation, they can barely handle Blighttown. And Blighttown's not even one of the coolest zones in Dark Souls. So, I mean, obviously, if it comes in the next generation of consoles, that's even better because if you guys notice, a lot of the features that I was asking for in the fifth video in this particular series, a lot of those features might not even be able to be achievable in current gen consoles. So if they leap to the next generation of consoles and maybe include some of the things I was talking about, awesome sauce. Now, next they talk about the leaving of Miyazaki, the fact that Miyazaki is no longer going to be working on Dark Souls 2. And in my previous videos I had mentioned, oh, he's going to take a supervisor role, he's still going to be involved some way. Well, the actual quote by Miyazaki himself was, I will not be involved in the actual development of Dark Souls 2. And yeah, that is concerning. I'm not going to say that it's just straight up doom and gloom, it's the end, Dark Souls is over. I mean, I think that might just be a little bit of an exaggeration there when people start going like that. Just because a different director is taking over, I mean, just because Miyazaki is not there, it doesn't necessarily mean that the game is going to shift its direction like 180, but we will be discussing more on that on a couple of more points further ahead. But the fact of the matter is that the whole supervisor thing, the only supervisory role he really had, according to the magazine, was he ensured things got started on solid footing before stepping aside. He talks about stuff like how he felt that Dark Souls was pushed out the door before it was 100% polished. And this time around, Miyazaki reviewed things in order to ensure that this wouldn't happen with Dark Souls 2, so that Dark Souls 2 is ready in time when the release date comes, that it comes out and it's like 100% polished. Maybe he is referring to bugs like the whole Killing of the First Flame bug, which after you killed Smo and Ornstein, you could just go to the Killing of the First Flame and glitch your way through the door, because that happened on a lot of speed runs, as we are aware. So maybe he's talking about glitches like that. So yeah, something else that he said was related to his supervisory role was looking after the transition from peer-to-peer to server-based network play, which he then quoted, it would be a markedly improved online, he then quoted, no, I quoted him, which he then said markedly improved online experience. So that's going to be pretty cool. I'm glad that he ensured that we would have server-based network play. In my opinion, it's a lot better than peer-to-peer because, as we all know, a lot of the times we will get lag stabbed to death, which is a royal pain in the ass. So Yeah, I mean, the switch to server-based network play, I think it's just the right move for the series' evolution, in my opinion. Then they go on to talk a little bit about how both Shibuya and Tanimura, the current directors for Dark Souls 2, previously worked on a From Software title which never really reached the West, I believe, which is called Another Century. Which is interesting when you compare that to the fact that Miyazaki himself worked on Armored Core before he created Demon Souls. So according to what the magazine said, it's not such a huge leap from mech-based combat to fantasy RPG combat. Now, I am going to say, I mean, that's a little bit... How should I put this? It is a little bit weird when you say it's not that big of a leap, because it's a pretty different combat system when you're talking about Armored Core, because I've played Armored Core 5, and when you talk about Armored Core 5 and Dark Souls, the combat is extremely different, as well as the whole vibe of the game, to be completely honest. I mean, it's a completely different title. I'm not exactly sure how much the fact that Miyazaki worked on Armored Core, I'm not exactly sure how much of that experience was poured into Demon Souls. You know what I mean? I mean, sure, he had experience in certain things on the game design, but I'm not exactly sure that it was that particular game that had any influence in him creating Demon Souls. The same way that I don't particularly agree that whatever experience they bring from the mech action series Another Century is really going to be that relevant for Dark Souls 2. That's my opinion. Now, another thing is the whole thing where everyone was wondering, did Miyazaki decide to leave? Was he pushed out? And it was basically said that Miyazaki leaving was a company decision. So what exactly does that mean? It means that basically From Software and Namco Bandai came together and they decided that they had to get Miyazaki out of the game in order to get new people in. Now, both Shibuya and Tanimura were also selected by, I would assume, by the same people who decided that Miyazaki should abandon the series in order for the series to take its evolutionary leap, so to speak. And here's another quote from the magazine. This is actually from Namco Bandai's producer or something. I forget. I forgot to point it down, but it's from someone from Namco Bandai, and this is what he had to say. Miyazaki worked on Demon Souls and Dark Souls, but for the IP to evolve and provide a new experience within the Dark Souls world, the new wind from directors Shibuya and Tanimura is key to providing players with a brand new Dark Souls experience. In order to maintain the expectations and satisfaction and the rewards that players experience, this was the right time to bring in the new characteristics and tastes of the directors for this series to continue on evolving. Now, this phrase right here is pretty much a politically correct sentence, so to speak. This whole sentence is one big mess for me, because, I mean, so what you're saying is that in order for the IP itself to evolve, you're going to have to get rid of one of the key figures who's made most of the key decisions in that particular franchise, which made its fans enjoy it so much, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. So, I mean, I realize that the whole point of this is to basically get the game across to a wider audience and all that jazz, but, I mean, I think I've expressed how I feel on that particular subject on video number 4 when I say that it's not the game itself that needs to change. It is the gaming culture that needs to change. So it's like, it's not that the game needs to be easier, like I've said on the previous video. It's just the gaming culture needs to not be so used to not be so used to having things handed over to them. That is the whole key to the problem, is that the game here is not wrong. The gaming community as a whole is what is wrong. Right, I mean, that I already explained how I feel about in the other video, and I don't want to go into too much detail with that again, but what I'm trying to say here is that I don't necessarily agree with what this gentleman from Namco Bandai has to say when he says that for the IP to evolve and provide a new experience within the Dark Souls world, the new win from directors Shibuya and Tanimura is key. I don't think the win that they're going to bring in is key. I mean, maybe they're going to bring in some cool stuff. who knows? But I think that what was key was Miyazaki's interpretation of the game itself. Now, again, there's not a whole lot that we can really know until we actually start seeing, gameplay footage, gameplay mechanics, all that kinds of good stuff. I'm not really going to say that, it's a huge mistake getting rid of Miyazaki or whatever. I mean, the first impulse to everyone, I feel, is that, yeah, it feels like it's a huge mistake that you're forcing the one person who was directly responsible for how the game has evolved up to this point, and you're kind of basically taking him off the project, putting someone else on it. I mean, I don't know. I'm just confused, in all honesty. I'm really confused by what their logic of thinking is. Assuming that they still want to make a Souls game like Dark Souls, their logic is kind of flawed here. But anyways, we will get into this a little bit ahead. I'm pretty sure of it. Again, according to what they said in the article, Miyazaki will go to work, or at least he clued in that he wished he could work on a warmer title from the ambience standpoint. So, I mean, that's pretty much the only clue they gave as to what his next title is going to be. Miyazaki actually expressed that he was sad about not being involved in the development of Dark Souls 2, which again just kind of points out to the fact that it was a company decision. They decided to move him away from Dark Souls 2. But there's something else that we have to remember here that I think is important. Now, just how far this is important or not will actually, I don't know. At this point, everything will depend upon what's to come. There's not really a whole lot that can be said at this point that's not just pure speculation. Like, I can sit here and say the game is over because Miyazaki is no longer there and it's just like going to be trash, whatever. And it might be true and it might be false. At this point, it's just very, very hard to really make up your mind about how good the game is going to be without actually being able to watch a gameplay or something like that. I mean, if I had watched those 10 minutes of footage that these guys were able to watch at Edge Magazine, if I was provided with those 10 minutes, maybe I could say something about it that was more definitive. Until then, I really can't say that the fact that Miyazaki's no longer there is just this big deal. It's going to completely destroy the game. But what I wanted to say is that we all need to realize that even though Miyazaki was a director and whatever, he was still the helm of a particular team. And it's like, the fact that Dark Souls is the way it is not 100% Miyazaki. There's an entire team behind him. Sure, he led the overall direction of the game, but I mean, I'm pretty sure there was still influence from everyone else on that particular team. There was some kind of influence in the game from that team that he basically led all this way. And I believe that a great big part of that team, if not all of it, apart from Miyazaki himself, is still going to be in the development of Dark Souls 2. So I mean, that team is also going to have a lot of influence into what the final product is going to become. So simply because Miyazaki is not there, we can't just immediately assume it's going to be terrible, because let's face it, even though there's some things that we're listening to right now, which I will refer to further on in the video, at the end of the day, Miyazaki is one man in leading a team of people who all contributed to the project that is now Dark Souls. Anyways, now, on the subject of accessibility, I mean, I think that the next kind of topics will more on to accessibility than anything else. Here is another quote from the Edge article. Tomohiro Shibuya sees an opportunity in the very opening moments of Dark Souls 2 to provide a warm welcome for new players. He talks about limiting the player's options for the very first portion of the game. Okay, now this sentence right here, unlike what I was talking about earlier, there is no way that this sentence can be positively interpreted in a positive way. There's just nothing in this sentence that is positive towards Dark Souls, in my opinion. Nothing at all. Let's just look at the key portions of this sentence. Okay, I'm gonna break it down a little bit here, but basically, the very opening moments of Dark Souls 2 provide a warm welcome for new players. What exactly is a warm welcome? Because I mean, when you start Dark Souls 1, you walk a couple of steps, whatever, and in a couple of seconds you're put into a room with a monster that, unless you have a lot of experience, you're not really going to be able to defeat. And you actually have to run away from him. And the very first time you get there, you might not know that you have to run away, and you're going to get your face beat and smashed instantly. That is a good thing. That sets the tone for Dark Souls game, just like in Dark Souls 1. As you're exiting the tutorial, you will most likely get killed unless, once again, you have a lot of experience by that demon thing that's at the end. You know what I mean? I mean, these are good things. These are things that set the pace for the rest of the game. It is very important for the players to learn that they need to die in order to experience the remainder of the game. And the thing is, it's not just about the consequence of death. Death in Dark Souls is something that will teach the player that he's doing something wrong. Death is a punishment, but it is not like a super strict punishment, so to speak. Because, I mean, most of the times that players die in Dark Souls, they'll learn something. Okay? So that is the whole point of dying in Dark Souls. It's learning how the game works. And this is important to set this pace right at the start. So when he's talking about a warm welcome, I assume that he's going to make the game... I mean, how other way can you really interpret warm welcome when you're talking about a video game? There's going to be someone there to greet you and tell you hello and give you a drink, welcome you home. I don't think that's going to be what happens. I mean, a warm welcome in a video game like Dark Souls, it would be like basically you smashing the crap out of a lot of monsters like easily. And then he says, limiting player options for the very first portion of the game. Now, this is something I hate in every game. Every single game that does this, I hate it. I really do. I mean, and this is my opinion. I mean, you may have different opinions on this particular thing. Some of you might like those tutorials where they limit your controls. I hate it. I friggin' hate it. The first thing I do when I get onto a game, I press every single button. I want to figure out how the controls work. And I hate the fact that, like, imagine this, okay? Certain games will have square will be like light attack and triangle will be like heavy attack, for instance. I believe this was the case in, no, actually, in, what was the name of that game? The Kingdoms of Age Reckoning, like, square was your main weapon attack, and then triangle would be your alternate weapon attack, something like that. And also in Darksiders 2, square is like your main attack, and triangle is going to be, and I'm talking about PlayStation controls. I mean, you guys figure out whatever controls those are in your Xbox 360 controller. And then triangle would be like a heavy attack or a different weapon. And here's the thing. Imagine that at the start of Dark Souls, they'll teach you like, oh, okay, you press this button to attack. And just because you're curious, like me, you press all the buttons in the controller and you're like, oh, so triangle doesn't really do anything, or circle. These two buttons don't really do anything and you don't care. And further on ahead in the tutorial, it's like, now go ahead and press triangle for a stronger attack. It's like, I could have figured that out by myself. You know how I do that? I press the fucking button. It's not that hard, really. I mean, I pick up a controller, I start up a game, I press all the buttons. I figure stuff out. I mean, sure, if you guys have something specific you want to tell me about it, sure, go ahead and tell me. But if I've already figured it out, I don't really need you limiting my controls in order for me to figure it out at a gradual pace or whatever. I mean, I'm pretty sure most gamers will be able to absorb. I mean, let's just talk about a quick concept here. I'm pretty sure that most gamers will be able to absorb the concept of 8 buttons, which is pretty much what you have for most of these games. I mean, we're talking square, triangle, circle, circle, cross, and then the 4 shoulder buttons. So, I mean, it's not really that much information to take in. We can just pick up the controller, start pressing buttons randomly, and figure a lot of stuff out by ourselves. I really hate when they limit your controls. Now, this might not be exactly what he's talking about when he's saying limit options, but what he can also be talking about is limiting options. Like, let's say, one could argue that the real star of Dark Souls is on Firelink Shrine, because the Undead Asylum is kind of like your tutorial area. So, when you get to Firelink Shrine, the game has something that I really, really love. This is something that Dark Souls has that I don't think I've seen in any game up to this point, which is just like you arrive at Firelink Shrine, and it's like you can go to the Catacombs, straight up. You can go to the new Londo Ruins. If you have the Master Key, you can even go to Blighttown. Hell, you can go to Blighttown even if you don't have the Master Key, because you can go all the way up through the forest, whatnot. Or you can go through the correct path, go to the tourist demon, and at infinitum, there's a lot more paths that you can take before you actually take the path, which I wouldn't even call it the right path. I would call it the easiest path. And when he's talking about limiting player options, the first two things that pop in my head is either limiting your controller options or limiting your options in terms of where you can go. And neither of those things I can actually say that gets me excited. As a matter of fact, it is a major turnoff straight up. Like straight up, as soon as I read, there's not a single thing, like I said at the start of this, there's not a single thing in this sentence that I can interpret positively. It's just terrible. It's terrible, and this is a 180-degree turn of Dark Souls itself. Dark Souls will teach you, but it will never limit you. Okay, it never limits you. If there's some place that you can't go in Dark Souls, it's because you haven't done something, but there's always tons and tons of options, and the decision of where to go and how to do things is always yours. It is never something that they're just like, oh, why don't you go here? Why don't you just go here? I mean, sure, there's a character at the start that will tell you, oh, you have to ring the Bells of Awakening, but he doesn't tell you, look, you have to go kill the Belfry gargoyles, and then you have to go and kill Quelaag, and you will be able to ring the 2 Bells of Awakening. He doesn't tell you that, because that's not relevant. What matters is you need to ring those bells. Figure out how to do it. I mean, you can think, can't you? You have a brain, don't you? It's not like this is rocket science. There's 2 bells in the world. Find them. It's not that hard. And again, this whole limiting the player options at the very first portion of the game, it's terrible. Then again, I mean, one could also interpret this from the way that your options are limited at the start of Dark Souls, if you consider the start is in the Asylum, in the Northern Undead Asylum, because there's not really a whole lot of stuff you can do. I mean, even then, you can still explore kind of 1 or 2 different paths in the Asylum, but at the end, you're going to end up kind of just basically engaging the Asylum demon, killing it, and moving on. There's not a lot of options there. The way that it is in Dark Souls is kind of acceptable. If they're talking about limiting your options once you reach a stage of like a Firelink Shrine or something, that to me is terrible. That's just terrible. So I don't know exactly what this means, but I hated this sentence. It really struck me in a very, very bad way, this particular sentence. Then something else he said is the player's ability to parse the meaning behind subtle hints or clues in the game's environment will determine the difficulty of the game and the challenges that are available for them to experience. Now, this particular sentence just seemed like, well, that seems fine to me. I mean, players' ability to parse the meaning behind subtle hints or clues in the game will determine the difficulty. Yeah, I mean, I guess I can live with this. But then again, there might be something here from that's lost in translation from the Japanese to English translation. I don't know. But this particular sentence here seems pretty much in the lines of Dark Souls, so I'm not really going to complain about it that much. Next up, the magazine goes a little bit, I keep saying the magazine, I should really say the article, but the article goes a little bit in the direction of worlds, so to speak, the topic of the world, of the setting. And one of the things they say is that the world will be more densely populated with specific points of interest. I'm not exactly sure what they meant by this. I mean, sure, the world being more densely populated, I assume they mean by NPCs, not necessarily by monsters. Because if they mean by monsters, what do you mean more densely populated? I don't think we needed more monsters. I mean, because there's a lot of different interpretations. And again, maybe I'm reading too much into this. But here's the thing: in some sections of the interview, Shibuya says that he wants to change the game he wants to improve the action on the game, so to speak. And when you're talking about action, maybe he's talking about, he said it could be like combat or maybe just the movement of the character. But when you start interpreting that on a more densely populated world, if you put 2 and 2 together and you think that when they say densely, they might mean monsters. I'm not saying they do, but just in case they mean monsters, it's actually kind of concerning, because I mean, imagine just hack and slash mentality. Just throw like 100 monsters at me while I mash buttons and destroy them. But that would be just a dramatic departure from the Dark Souls style, which I don't think they'll make a mistake of doing. So I think the densely populated thing might just be more about certain areas with NPCs and whatnot. And again, I don't know exactly what to read into it. There's just, like I said, we need to be able to see some gameplay before we can really put everything that is said here into perspective. Then he also mentioned, it's actually mentioned in the article, the notion that Dark Souls series need to evolve is a theme emphasized a number of times by both From Software and Namco Bandai. I'm not necessarily sure that, like, the Dark Souls series need to evolve. It doesn't really need to evolve that much. I mean, the formula is pretty much nailed down. It's hands down the best combat system that I've seen in ever. Pretty much. I don't think I've seen a better combat system than this one. I mean, there's other cool combat systems, sure, of different styles and whatnot, but I haven't really seen a better one, I wouldn't say. Because, I mean, this combat system is, again, like I've said in the past, this combat system is incredibly precise. You know exactly what each of your actions in the controller do, and you know exactly that it's a matter of timing when you want to do parries. It's a matter of positioning yourself when you want to do backstabs. There's really not a lot of cheap things about the combat system, apart obviously from backstab spamming and whatnot, but that's kind of an abuse in the system, and that could be improved, but I wouldn't really say that it requires a dramatic evolution, which seems to be emphasized throughout the article. I wouldn't say that it needs to evolve and become this amazing thing. It's already pretty amazing. And if you're going to evolve and simplify it too much, oversimplify, like they also mention a lot of times in the article, that might actually be a bad thing. But, I mean, it's good that they think the series need to evolve, but once again, we need to watch just footage of gameplay to figure out what exactly they mean by that evolution. Now, something also they mentioned in the article, once again, is Dark Souls 2 will be staged in a seamless open world full of dangers, but Shibuya also plans to weave in elements that will help guide the player. So, good thing and a bad thing in this particular sentence. So the good thing is that Dark Souls 2 is going to be open world, which I really like, because even though, once again, like I've said in the past, I love the Nexus is really cool, but I much prefer the open world style of Dark Souls. And they say they're going to be staging it in a seamless open world full of danger. So this is awesome. So we're going to have the same open world as we have in Dark Souls. Well, not the same world itself, the same style of open world as we have in Dark Souls. So that's good. But then it's like Shibuya also plans to weave in elements that will help to guide the player. Now, this could have several meanings, once again, and even, again, the whole thing, it can be lost in translation between Japanese and English, whatever. But there are hints already in Dark Souls. Dark Souls has a ton of hints, for those of you who aren't aware. I mean, there's a ton of hints that were left behind in the developers in the form of those messages. Like, for instance, in Ulasil Township, the place where you pick up the silver pendant, it's actually behind the hidden wall. If you go all the way up to that wall and you don't figure out that it's there, there's a message on the floor. You read the message, and on the message it says, "Let there be light," indicating that you need to do some kind of something with a light in that location. So you might pull out your sunlight maggot, you might do your cast light, or whatever, and once you do that, the secret wall opens, thus revealing the silver pendant. And it's like, one could say that that is an element that's been weaved in to help guide the player. The problem is that the whole thing about Shibuya is that his philosophy, he states on several parts in the interview, once again, is that he is a very direct individual, and he wants to directly tell things to the players, not so subtle as a little message on the floor. Maybe something will happen that will kind of even force the player to do whatever Shibuya intends him to do on a specific location. So that is the problem with the whole elements being weaved in to help guide the player. It's kind of concerning. It is very concerning to me, this, because like I said, in Dark Souls it's already been done, and it's very subtle, which is a good thing. I don't want that kind of stuff to just be jumping at your face like, "Hey, you dumbass, why don't you go ahead and use a source of light right here on the X mark, please. Do it now, or I will keep this NPC talking to you for an hour until you do." I hope it's not going to be something like that. Next up, they mentioned, once again, in the whole thing about the setting of the game, that they are dreaming up concepts that didn't exist in previous games. Now, this again could be something lost in translation, but when they say previous games, that got me thinking a lot, because, I mean, Dark Souls and Demon Souls are not supposed to be connected. So what are you talking about, concepts that didn't exist in previous games? You should say concepts that didn't exist in the previous game. I don't know. It's just kind of weird. Maybe they're planning on connecting both the worlds. Would that even make sense at this point? I don't know. But I mean, since he has a more direct way of telling the story, I guess we'll find out if they decide that in Dark Souls 2 they want to connect the world of Lordran somehow with the world of Boletaria, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but who knows? Who knows? Next up, they talk about implementing a system that will enable you to easily review the clues and hints that you've seen earlier on in the game. So this obviously kind of points out to a typical RPG journal type of interface. In all honesty, in a Souls game, I don't like it. I don't like this feature on a Souls game. It's just my opinion. You guys may have your own opinions. Let me know in the comments. But me personally, I don't like having this in a Souls game. Again, just an opinion. Next up, they go and they start interviewing Shibuya. And I actually had a lot of problems in this particular part of the interview, because this is like one of the worst scans of all the scans that are circling the internet right now. And there's actually a particular word that I wasn't able to figure out what the word was. And whatever, we'll get to that in a couple of seconds. So something that Shibuya said is that Dark Souls 2 will be a direct sequel to Dark Souls, which, like I said in previous videos, is something that I would really, really like. And that also opens up the possibility for save game importation, like I've mentioned in video number 5. And I think that would be something really cool. Really, really cool. Shibuya also says that the name of the place where the game is going to... the name of the area where the game is going to take place is going to be key to the story. To me, this just screams out Astora, if I'm to be completely honest. Because I think that Astora is kind of... It's just an area that's mentioned abundantly in Dark Souls 1. I'm not to say that it's the most mentioned of all, but there's definitely a lot of mention of Astora. There's also several interactions with Thurlan. But I still think that Astora is a big theme. I mean, Oscar's from Astora, Solaire's from Astora, Anastasia's from Astora. I think there's a lot of stuff from Astora in the game, and I think that Astora is going to be the place. But again, this is just pure speculation on my part, and there's nothing on the interview that claims that it will be Astora. But again, I think Astora is just a really rich location where they could do a lot with the Dark Souls story. He also pretty much confirmed that it is a different place in the same world. So let's say that Lordran is part of a world called Earth, like they say in the interview. Then this other place will be in a completely different area, or this other area will be in a completely different place, but it is still in the same world. Once again, your main character is going to be cursed and seeking to find a cure for his affliction. And then they went on to say that the defining change from Dark Souls 1, from Demon Souls to Dark Souls, I'm even not sure exactly, because I didn't point this part out and I'm not looking at the interview right now, but I think they said that one of the things that came from the moving of Demon Souls into Dark Souls was switching up the Nexus for an open world style thing. And then they said, what would be the biggest change that one could expect from Dark Souls to Dark Souls 2? And this is the phrase that I was talking about. I couldn't identify one of the words. And he said, the concept of time and the existence of, and this other thing I couldn't figure out what it was. According to another online article, the sentence goes, the concept of time and the existence of time. So that's weird to me, because I mean, you put time in the same place. And then they kept asking about this particular defining change, and the only thing he did was he switched up the word time with word eras. So the concept of eras and the existing of eras within the game. So this obviously goes back to that whole thing that I was talking about, that the concept of time travel had been introduced in Dark Souls 1, and therefore it was easy to, it's kind of a concept that's already in place, so players would not feel that strange about going back in time or going to the future, whatever. So basically, the whole thing that he's talking about is that the concept of Dark Souls is eras. So if you look at it from a world design standpoint, right? So in Demon Souls, you had the Nexus. Dark Souls, you now have open world. If on top of that you put in that fourth dimension, which is time, basically, can we expect to visit the particular location that we're going to be in, which could be Astora, could be something else, but can we expect to visit the same areas in different times as already happened with the DLC? And we can see the changes that happen through time. Like, you can go back in time, fight a dragon in a specific area. Now, that actually makes a lot of sense with something that just came to mind. Like I said at the start of the video, a lot of the stuff just comes to mind as I am talking about it. Because, I mean, we were all wondering about who is the Beast of Astora. And if you actually, if the game is actually happening in Astora, and once again, this is not related to the interview, this is just me just going on my ridiculous ramblings. But if the game is in Astora, and there's time travel, because like the sentence says, the concept of time and the existence of time, or the concept of eras, the existence of eras, we could possibly go back in time, fight off the Beast of Astora, and we get to actually play the character who fought off the Beast of Astora. That is extremely exciting, I have to admit, because I mean, you read about the Beast of Astora in Dark Souls, and then you would actually be able to fight the Beast of Astora in Dark Souls 2. That right there would be awesome. I think that would be really cool. Just my opinion. Now, something else that Shibuya mentioned is seasoned Dark Souls players might feel some awkwardness at the beginning of the game because he's going to be changing several aspects of the game. So this leads me to the whole maybe he's limiting our controls thing, so we might feel it a little bit awkward. Like, what do you mean I can't parry at the start of the game? I can't backstab at the start of the game? What the balls? So that might be some of the awkwardness that he's talking about. Again, not sure. It could be that he's changing some of the combat system, which would be a real mistake. Like, if he's making some significant changes to the combat system, I feel that would be very, very detrimental to the series, but I don't know. Then he also mentions the whole thing about how he wants to enhance the action in the game, be it through motions, which I assume he's relating to character movement, or the combat system. When he mentions action and combat system put together, I mean, let's face it, the Dark Souls combat system is not really that much action, so to speak. I mean, you can consider it to be a very action-based combat system. Me personally, I don't, because to me, the whole action combat systems is those that you're just like stringing together a whole bunch of combos. Dark Souls is a different beast. Dark Souls is more about precision. It's about studying your enemies, figuring out, okay, now's the time to strike. It's more about timing. It's about figuring out, okay, there's an opening on this enemy at this exact time. Smack him and get out. Get in a good heavy attack, or maybe it's like there's a big opening and like my particular weapon is very, very fast, so in this opening I'm gonna get in there, lay like all my stamina in attacks and get the hell out of dodge. You know, that's what the combat system of Dark Souls is about. It's about interpreting your enemies, exploiting their weaknesses, and figuring out the mechanics of parry, riposte, backstab, dodge, all that stuff. It's not really that much about action, which I kind of tend to associate more, and this might just be a flaw on my part, that I associate action with some more button mashing as opposed to precise button pressing, because to me the combat in the Soul series is more precise than anything that I've ever played before, apart from maybe turn combat or something. So when he talks about action, it really has me concerned. Now, if he's talking about the character motions, I guess there could be some stuff done, you know, maybe with the running or something. But then again, it's just so refined already. I don't really see a lot of need to improve upon it that much. So I don't know. I just don't know. Then he says he intends to make the covenants more accessible. This I can agree to in some point. But my main concern is not really making them more accessible, because the covenants were pretty accessible as they were. It's not that hard really to go and get into a covenant. I mean, I figured out where Nito was by myself. I never really went to a wiki or anything. It's just like, oh, there's a sarcophagus here. I'm going to put myself inside it because it says here I can. I'm going to wait a while, see what happens. And eventually ended up in Nito's place. So I'm just saying, experimentation is so much more rewarding than having things handed to you. So I don't necessarily care that much about the Covenant's accessibility. What I do care about is about the Covenant's relevance. Now that is a different beast altogether. Covenant should be more relevant, and I believe I mentioned a lot of this back in the other video, so if you want to know more of my opinion on that, go back and watch the video about the features that I would like in Dark Souls 2. Then he said, the game will be more straightforward and understandable. This is where things get, it's that whole thing about there's such a rewarding aspect to Dark Souls story, to figuring out how the story goes by reading item descriptions, by figuring stuff out through events, by figuring out that Lautrec was the one who killed the Firekeeper in Dark Souls. Like, there's so much more reward to you figuring out the story for yourself, to you actually thinking, using your brain, you know? That's the whole thing that I always come back to. It's like, don't people want to think for themselves? Do they need to be told everything? It's so much more rewarding when you think for yourself and figure stuff out for yourself, or when you're discussing stuff and figuring stuff out by discussing with someone else. The whole community aspect that I talked about, it's so much cooler than just having a story straight told to your face. Like, has anyone, let's see a game that the story is pretty straightforward. Has anyone really had, like, let's say, I don't mean that this game is a bad thing, okay? No, it's a different experience, okay? But let's talk about, for instance, Dragon Age. Hell, not even Dragon Age. Since there's so many comparisons between these two games, let's talk about Skyrim itself. How many people out there are actively discussing Skyrim lore? How many? I actually don't know the answer. I'm curious to know. Are there a lot of people discussing Skyrim's lore? I don't think so, because the lore is pretty much there. They tell you what it's all about through dialogues, sometimes even through texts. I don't know. Maybe there are a lot of people discussing Skyrim lore. I honestly don't know, but I doubt it. I doubt that percentage-wise, let's say there's a universe of people who play Skyrim, and then there's a universe of people who play Dark Souls. I'm willing to bet that the percentage of people in the Skyrim universe that actually discuss the lore, percentage-wise, okay, I'm not talking about raw numbers, I'm talking about a percentage. I believe that percentually, there's a lot more people in the Dark Souls universe that talk about Dark Souls lore than in the Skyrim universe. This is my opinion. And again, this is not a bad thing. These games are supposed to be different experiences. There's Skyrim and there's Dark Souls. Two different games. And it's cool. It's two completely different experiences. This is a good thing. Variety. Not all games should be like Skyrim or the Elder Scrolls, whatever you want to call it. Not all games should be like that. Not all games should be like Dragon Age. Just like not all games should be like Dark Souls. You know? Dark Souls should be its own thing. It should not be made more straightforward or whatever you want to call it. But anyways, once again, it's my opinion. Makes the story a little bit more clear or directly expressed to the player is also something that's mentioned in the article. So yeah, that's obviously related to the thing that I was just talking about, which is very, very, in my opinion, it's a very bad thing for the Dark Souls universe. Shibuya also wants to make sure that Dark Souls 2 opening draws players and gets them addicted right away without immediately making players feel rejected from the game system. See, this is the thing. This right here is one of those things that just gives me bad vibes about Dark Souls 2. He wants players to get addicted. He wants to draw players in and get them addicted without making players feel rejected from the game system. So, I mean, why is... It's just so weird. Because I know that at the end of the day, this is all a business, right? I mean, let's face it. The gaming industry is a business. So obviously you want to get as much people to your game. Just like when I make my videos, I would obviously like as much people to come and watch my videos. The difference is I don't change my videos to get more people to come and watch them. I don't do that. Because if I wanted to do that, I could have just kept on doing World of Warcraft videos without having any passion for the game, and I would be getting a lot more views with those videos than I'm getting with these ones, for sure. And you know why? Because there's a much bigger community for that game. I mean, hell, anyone who really wants to have a lot of views on gaming videos on YouTube, the easiest way to do it is go for World of Warcraft and League of Legends, because they're huge markets. It's a huge potential market to get people to come and watch their videos, you know? But I mean, the difference between certain YouTubers is that they want to do this for the passion and others want to do it for the money. I mean, personally, I would like to make more money. I'll be damn straight about that, but I'm not going to give up on my beliefs for that. And that is something that I think could be applied to the gaming industry as well. It's like, look, I know you all want to make more money, because I feel the same way. I want to make more money. Hell, I need to make more money. But how much are we willing to sacrifice to make that money? You know, that is where the problems begin. I mean, this whole thing about drawing players in, getting them addicted right away, making sure they're not rejected by the game system. Look, if they don't like the game, you need to tell them, look, you don't like the game, that's fine. Done. Okay? It's not like, let's change the game to please everyone. It would be the same thing as me. Let me change my videos and change my opinions, make sure I please every single person on the planet. It's just not gonna happen. For instance, the people that think that Dark Souls needs to have an easier mode, they're never gonna like my videos, because I will always completely tell them otherwise. I will always be against their opinion forever. So, I mean, that's the thing. It's all about how much are you willing to compromise in the name of making a profit. And I hope they're not willing to compromise that much, but a lot of things are indicating that there's going to be a lot of compromises in Dark Souls 2 in order to make more money. And that's something I don't really agree with, because if I don't do it, I don't compromise on my videos, okay? I do not compromise on my videos. I do not find it acceptable that another company compromises on their principles in order to make more money. To me, that's not acceptable. So, then again, I'm just stubborn, and that's probably the reason why I like Dwarf so much, so whatever. At some point, he also, this is in that page where they're discussing the art, and he talks about this is the main hero. I mean, the whole thing when he says this is the main hero, I don't really read too much into that, to be completely honest, because again, there's a lot of stuff that's lost from Japanese to English. I mean, who the hell knows what main hero means in Japanese? I know I don't. Maybe someone in the comment section knows Japanese. Maybe you guys can tell me what exactly is the Japanese interpretation of main hero, because the translation might be incredibly misleading, in all honesty. But when they say this is the main hero, let's face it. I mean, in the early art for Dark Souls, the main hero was portrayed as Oscar of Astora, right? Or someone who looks like Oscar, someone in the Elite Knight armor set. That is the main hero. It's an abstract concept. That's really all I read into it, because I honestly don't think that they're willing to go that far as just say, no. This is like your, let's say, Kratos of Dark Souls. I don't think they're gonna go that way. I really don't. And if they do, whew, that right there is gonna destroy the game straight up. Like, I'll still play it, but that right there would destroy the game. Like, it's like, no, this time around you're gonna play Kratos, the Dark Souls version. No, forget about it. That would just destroy the thing, in my opinion. Something that was discussed in this particular page as well is that they were making references to dynamic weather as being a possibility. I think that would be really cool. That would add a lot to the Dark Souls world, having some weather effects added in there. They also mentioned that there's apparently a character in the world who is Dr. Frankenstein, who is combining multiple parts of monsters to make grotesque looking beasts and whatnot. Guess that's kind of cool. Doesn't really tell us a whole lot. That was obviously something I was extremely excited about, as you guys can probably tell, which was the dwarf. The dwarf in that whole art section was awesome, and he was just picking up this massive axe. Now, Shibuya said he is not necessarily, but he did not deny it. He did not say he is most definitely not. He said he is not necessarily a dwarf, but he is a character that lives underground. So I hope we get to meet this character. Well, hell, I would like to be able to have a playable version of this character. That would be awesome to me. I mean, not this character, but just like have the hate settings, the whole body settings of a dwarf. I think that would be awesome with that massive beard that he has. That'd be really cool. Then there was something weird about how there was like a monster who was apparently a blind bandaged zombie with a gaping open rib cage, and Shibuya was just like, no, this is top secret. It's kind of weird about that. I mean, he just looked like a random monster, almost looked like a dredgeling, really. So I don't know. Then they talk a little bit about morality system, how the fact that if you do evil deeds, you will eventually meet something that's in the art, in that particular art page, which is the Chariot Executioner. There was already a morality system of sorts in Dark Souls 1, if you really think about it. I mean, let's just look at the Blades of Darkmoon, Oswald of Kareem. Yeah, I think it was from Kareem. Oswald, who would forgive your sins. That in itself was a morality system. Like, you go ahead and you kill a wrong NPC, and the Blades of Darkmoon are going to be able to invade onto your world and kill you. So that in itself was a morality system. It was already in place. So I don't think that you should read too much when they say morality system. It's probably going to be something in those lines, except instead of being invaded by the Blades of Darkmoon, you're going to be invaded by this chariot riding dude who is obviously going to be able to outrun you and maybe run you over and kill you. No, I don't know. Maybe you'll be able to kill him if you know the layout of the land in a good way that you can like put yourself in higher ground or something, do a plunging attack. But again, you shouldn't read too much into morality system. I don't think they're gonna go too deep into that, but I could be wrong. Then they started mentioning vehicles and how vehicles would be a possibility and whatnot. I think this was more wishful thinking from the people who were interviewing than anything else, because I don't think that vehicles are going to be that much of an integral part of Dark Souls 2, in my opinion. I don't think they're going to be implemented in the way that players are expecting. I think that if vehicles are implemented, most likely you won't be able to control them, like they mentioned on the whole boat scenario. So it's just a lot of unknowns. And finally, to finish things off, the last thing I really wanted to say is that just something that I've once again took from the interview, which is that Dark Souls 2 was actually already in development prior to it being released in the West, prior to Dark Souls 1 being released in the West, according to what is said in that interview. So they were already working on the sequel before the damn thing was even fully made for the Western market, which is just it's weird in a way, because I mean it's almost like they already knew they were going to have a lot of success on it, but at the same time, let's face it, during that time Miyazaki was working with the series, so this could be a very, very good thing, because I mean the only time that Miyazaki's removal was actually mentioned was when they announced the trailer. Now, this could mean that Miyazaki has already worked on Dark Souls 2 for over a year, or it could mean that Miyazaki was removed like early on and they just only bothered to tell us now. Either way, I look at it as a positive thing, because Dark Souls 2 has been in development for quite some time, so maybe Miyazaki has a lot of influence in what has been developed of Dark Souls 2. They also mentioned that the Dark Souls 2 team is substantially bigger, so once again, Namco Bandai just putting a lot more people in there, but this is actually not so much, I would not read it as much of a positive thing, because like I said earlier, one of the good things we had about the fact that, I mean, not necessarily a good thing, but one of the hopes I had after knowing that Miyazaki was not in production anymore is that you still have that whole team that was behind him who has probably a similar philosophy that Miyazaki had. But if you just start putting a lot of more people into that team, that whole thing might start getting diluted in favor of broader opinions for greater appeal and all that bullshit. And according to what the magazine said, for over 1 year of development, if we take into account all the dates they mentioned in the interview, over 1 year of development, 25% of the game has been finished so far. So if so far they've only done 25% of the game and they've been at it for about a year, I mean, of course, we all know that development cycles will get to a certain point where it's, I mean, maybe not all of us know that, and maybe I know that because I have the computer degree science thing, so I know a little bit more about development cycles, but basically they get to a point where there's a lot of, how should I put this? I mean, the early stages of a project are always going to take longer. The conception stage, the developing the mechanics stage, all that stuff. You know, when you start like designing levels and whatnot, it starts going faster. So it doesn't mean that it's going to take them 4 years. So we're not going to be seeing the game for another 3 years. No, that's entirely wrong. What it means is that most likely we're not going to be seeing it in 2013. Because if at this point they're at 25%, if we are seeing at 2013, those guys are on a freaking tight schedule, I'll tell you that much. Not to mention that, again, there's a big possibility that Dark Souls will only really come on the next generation, which would, in my opinion, actually be a good thing. Because, I mean, there's so much stuff out there. I mean, it's hard to really, when you're working in this industry and trying to figure out all the projects that you want to cover and whatnot, it's actually getting harder and harder because there's so much good stuff out there, you know? It's good that it's actually going to take a while because you don't want to overwhelm your fans. You want to allow them to also play other things so that they can then experience the enthusiasm of going back to their big passion, which in my case is obviously Dark Souls. Now, after all this, how exactly do I feel about Dark Souls 2? Is it all doom and gloom? Is there still hope? And in all honesty, I mean, I feel that there's a lot of stuff that is going to affect me in a negative way. I mean, namely when he says that he wants to make the story more explicit, when he's more concerned about the accessibility of things rather than their relevance. Because, again, he shouldn't be concerned about the accessibility of covenants. They're not that hard to access. What he should be concerned with is their relevance. How much do they play into the game? I would like Covenants to take a much more center stage to the game. Hell, you can go through the whole game without even caring about Covenants. And it's not like you really need to care about Covenants. I want Covenants to be relevant, not necessarily accessible. Same thing about the story. I mean, story does not necessarily need to be more accessible. The combat does not need to be more action-based. Sure, there's a couple of things that I spoke about in the combat with the whole stances thing and whatnot. And if you guys didn't see that yet, please watch the 5th video where I talk about the features I would like to see in Dark Souls 2. But once again, there's a lot of things here that are negative. But there's a lot of things also that give me a hope for perspective. Like, I hope that Miyazaki had something to do with Dark Souls 2 development up to this point. There's a hope there because the game has been in development for over a year now, and they've only now just announced that Miyazaki has left. Maybe Miyazaki has been working in the game throughout that year, kind of putting things in place to make sure that the Dark Souls 2 will remain true to Dark Souls. There's hope in me, hopeful that the team that is in place from Dark Souls 1 will actually convert all those other people that they're chucking together in with them to help them develop the game, that they will convert them to the Dark Souls 1 way of thinking, as opposed to this whole more direct approach, so to speak. So there is hope there. I mean, there's a lot of hope. It's a good thing that the graphics are going to be more amazing and whatever, because, I mean, let's be honest here. There's a lot of games who sell themselves on graphics alone. A big graphics push for Dark Souls might be something that will get more people into it simply because it looks better. It's not that I think it's necessary, but it's something that can make the simple fact the game looks better might get more people into it. That is a good thing. I'm very hopeful with the new multiplayer experience, switching from peer-to-peer to server-based. Like I said, I expect a lot of improvements on this end, namely better co-op, all that kinds of good stuff. So overall, I think my feeling for this game is cautiously hopeful. Okay, it's like I really hope the game stays true to Dark Souls, but I am not sure if it will. So it's like I need to almost calm myself down. I need to not be as excited as I am for Dark Souls 2 because I really fear that I might be disappointed. But again, I don't know if I will be or not. At this point, I think it's hard to really just say, oh, it's all over, it's doom and gloom, it's the end. No, I think it's too soon to say that. I think we'll need to wait. We'll need to see some gameplay. We'll need to see some more teaser trailers. We'll need to see more content before we can actually say, no, it's over, it's done, forget about it, it's not Dark Souls. Okay? So for now, I'm going to stay cautiously hopeful. And we are at 1 hour and something, and my voice is going. And to those of you who are still watching at this point, thank you very much for watching. As usual, leave me your feedback, comments, all that kinds of good stuff, and I will see you guys in the next one.